Meanwhile, at the security checkpoint, Patterson was escalating the situation further, seemingly enjoying the power he held over the elderly veteran. "I'm going to need you to step aside," he announced to James, his voice carrying across the terminal. "I'm calling my supervisor to take a look at this fake ID and these supposedly authentic military documents you claim to have." James felt his face burn with embarrassment as hundreds of travelers watched him being singled out and humiliated. Security cameras were recording the interaction. Passengers were openly filming with their phones, and he could imagine the headlines: "Elderly man accused of stolen valor at airport." "Sir," James said, his voice still controlled despite the storm of emotions inside him, "I understand you're doing your job, but I'm telling you the truth. I served my country for 4 decades, and I earned every medal and commendation I received through blood, sweat, and sacrifice in combat zones around the world." Patterson's response was swift and cruel, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who had never faced real danger or sacrifice. "Save it for someone who believes you, old man. Real veterans don't have to prove themselves by making up elaborate stories about their service. If you were really some kind of war hero, you'd have better documentation than this questionable ID that probably came from some online scam site." When Patterson announced he was calling his supervisor to examine the fake ID, Rodriguez made his decision that would change everything. "Excuse me," Rodriguez said, stepping out of line with the fluid grace of an elite warrior who'd served in the world's most dangerous places. His voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in life-and-death situations. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with this gentleman." Patterson looked up from James's ID, annoyed at the interruption and clearly irritated that his show of authority was being questioned. "Sir, please return to your place in line. This security matter doesn't concern you, and I need you to mind your own business." Rodriguez smiled, but there was nothing friendly or accommodating. Veteran story life. Elderly veteran humiliated at airport security. 6 Navy SEALs step forward and silence everyone. When 78-year-old Colonel James Mitchell approached the TSA checkpoint at Phoenix International Airport, he had no idea that showing his military ID would lead to the most humiliating experience of his post-war life. The security supervisor took one look at the elderly man with the cane and immediately assumed his Medal of Honor citation was fake, loudly announcing that old guys like this always try to steal valor for special treatment. What happened next would be captured on dozens of phones and viewed by millions, because 6 young men in civilian clothes had just witnessed the entire exchange, and they weren't tourists or businessmen, they were Navy SEALs returning from deployment. They were about to teach everyone in that terminal what real military brotherhood looked like. The morning sun streamed through Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport as travelers hurried through terminal. It was just after 7 a.m., and the TSA checkpoint was bustling with business travelers and vacationers heading across the country. Among the crowd, 78-year-old Colonel James Mitchell moved with the measured pace of someone who walked with a polished wooden cane, a necessity since Vietnam. Shrapnel wounds had caught up with his aging joints. He wore a navy blazer over khaki slacks, looking like any elderly gentleman traveling to visit family. But tucked in his wallet was his Medal of Honor citation, earned when he saved 43 men during a devastating Vietnam ambush. Today was special. James was flying to Norfolk for his great-nephew's Marine Corps commissioning ceremony. The first time in a decade he'd dealt strong enough for such travel. As James approached the TSA checkpoint, he presented his military ID with crisp precision. "Good morning. I'm traveling on military orders to Norfolk." The initial agent examined his ID routinely, but TSA supervisor Gary Patterson noticed the interaction. After 12 years with TSA, Patterson had developed cynical assumptions about elderly travelers claiming military status. "Let me take a look at that ID," Patterson called out loudly, examining James's identification with exaggerated suspicion. "This looks questionable to me. The photo doesn't really look like you." James stood patiently. "Sir, I can assure you that identification is genuine. I served my country for 40 years. "Yeah, well, that's exactly what someone with a fake ID would say," Patterson announced loud enough for nearby travelers to hear. "We see this stolen valor stuff all the time. You old guys always have the same story. Purple Heart, Bronze Star, right? You people think you can just flash some fake military ID and get special treatment. The accusation hit James like a physical blow. No one had ever questioned his service or suggested he was pretending to be a veteran. The public humiliation was devastating as dozens of travelers turned to watch, many pulling out phones to record. As a matter of fact, James said quietly, maintaining his composure despite the mounting humiliation, "I do have medals, including one that I'd rather not have earned the way I did." Patterson rolled his eyes theatrically, enjoying the attention his confrontation was drawing. "Right. And I suppose you saved your whole unit too. Let me guess, Vietnam War hero. Right. That's the classic stolen valor story. Next, you'll be telling me you have a Medal of Honor or some other made-up decoration." What Patterson didn't know was that 6 men standing in the civilian security line had been watching the entire exchange with growing alarm and anger. They weren't tourists or business travelers, despite their casual clothes and unremarkable appearance. They were Navy SEALs from Team 7, returning home from a classified deployment that had taken them to the other side of the world, and they recognized exactly what they were witnessing: the systematic humiliation of a fellow veteran. Master Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez was the first to notice the confrontation. At 34, he was the senior enlisted member of the team, with 5 deployments under his belt and a Silver Star for actions he couldn't discuss outside his unit. As a Hispanic American from East Los Angeles, Marcus had experienced his own share of discrimination, and he knew the look of a man being unfairly targeted because of assumptions about who he was supposed to be. "You seeing this bullshit?" Marcus whispered to his teammate, Chief Petty Officer David Chen, who was standing next to him in line. Chen, a 31-year-old Chinese-American from San Francisco, had completed 4 combat deployments with the SEALs and earned his own collection of medals for actions in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's a real veteran getting disrespected by someone who's never served a day in his life, Chen replied grimly, his jaw tightening as he watched Patterson continue to humiliate James in front of hundreds of travelers. The other 4 members of their team had also turned their attention to the security checkpoint. Petty Officer First Class Robert Washington, a 29-year-old African-American from Detroit, had been checking messages on his phone when the confrontation started. Without thinking, he switched to camera mode and began documenting what was happening, knowing from experience how important it was to capture these moments of injustice. Petty Officer First Class Kevin O'Sullivan, a 28-year-old Irish-American from Boston, was quietly seething as he watched an elderly veteran being publicly humiliated. Petty Officer Second Class Michael Thompson, a 26-year-old from rural Montana, and Petty Officer Second Class James Park, a 25-year-old Korean-American from Seattle, completed the group of warriors who were about to teach the TSA supervisor a lesson he would never forget. "This is absolutely unacceptable," Thompson whispered, his hands clenching into fists. "That man served his country with honor, and this rent-a-cop is treating him like a criminal based on nothing but age discrimination." Rodriguez smiled, but there was nothing friendly or accommodating about it. It was the kind of smile that seasoned warriors wore when they were about to demonstrate just how wrong someone's assumptions could be. "Actually, it concerns me very much," Rodriguez replied, his voice remaining calm but taking on an edge that made several nearby travelers stop what they were doing and pay attention. "You see, I'm active duty military, and so are my 5 teammates over there. We've been watching you disrespect a fellow veteran for the past 15 minutes, and we're not going to stand for it anymore." As if on cue, and with the kind of precise coordination that only comes from years of training together, the other 5 SEALs stepped out of line and formed a semicircle around the security check. They didn't say anything threatening, didn't make any aggressive gestures, but their presence was unmistakable and immediately commanding. These weren't ordinary travelers. They moved with the coordinated precision of a military unit, and their bearing left no doubt that they were dangerous men who knew exactly what they were doing. Patterson's confidence began to waver as he found himself facing 6 of the most highly trained warriors in the American military. The casual authority he'd been wielding over an elderly man suddenly seemed much less impressive, when confronted by men who were clearly accustomed to real authority and real responsibility. "Look, I don't know who you think you are," Patterson said, his voice losing some of its earlier arrogance, "but I'm just doing my job here. This man's ID looks suspicious, and I have every right to question it. I'm Master Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez, United States Navy SEALs." Rodriguez interrupted, pulling out his military ID with the same crisp precision that James had displayed earlier. "These are my teammates. We've just returned from a classified mission overseas, and we're traveling home to see our families. Just like this gentleman here." He gestured toward James, who was watching the interaction with a mixture of gratitude, amazement, and profound relief that someone was finally standing up for him. David Chen stepped forward, his own military ID in hand, his expression serious and professional. "Chief Petty Officer David Chen, I'd like to take a look at this gentleman's ID that you claim is fake, because I've been through military security checks hundreds of times, and I know what authentic documentation looks like." Patterson found himself surrounded by 6 of the most dangerous men in the American military, and his bravado began to crumble rapidly. The situation had escalated far beyond what he'd expected when he decided to question an elderly traveler's identification. "Now wait just a minute," Patterson started to protest. "No, you wait," Rodriguez said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more intimidating than any shout could have been. "This man told you he served his country with honor. He told you he earned his medals through military service in combat. And instead of thanking him for his sacrifice like any decent American would do, you accused him of stolen valor in front of hundreds of people." Robert Washington stepped forward, his phone held conspicuously in his hand, still recording. "What's your name, sir? I want to make sure I spell it correctly when I post this video online for the world to see." Patterson's face went pale as he realized the implication. "You can't record me without my permission. This is a federal facility." "Actually, I can," Washington replied calmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who knew exactly what he was talking about. "We're in a public place. You're a public employee performing your duties, and you're publicly humiliating a veteran who deserves much better treatment than this. The First Amendment protects my right to document this interaction." By now, the confrontation had drawn a significant crowd. Other travelers were gathering around the security checkpoint, forming an impromptu audience that was clearly sympathetic to James and increasingly hostile toward Patterson. Many of them were recording with their phones, and the atmosphere in the terminal had shifted from the usual rushed indifference to something more electric and charged with moral outrage. Kevin O'Sullivan turned to James, his expression softening with the kind of respect that one warrior shows to another. "Sir, what's your name and unit? We'd like to know who we're standing with." "Colonel James Mitchell, retired," James replied, his voice stronger now that he had allies standing with him. "I served with the 1st Infantry Division in Vietnam and later commanded various units during my 40-year career in the United States Army." "When were you in Vietnam?" O'Sullivan asked, his tone respectful and interested. "3 tours between 1968 and 1974, James replied. "Lost a lot of good men over there, but we did our job and brought as many home as we could." Rodriguez nodded, recognizing the quiet way James described his service. Real veterans didn't brag about their actions or embellish their stories. They simply stated the facts and let others draw their own conclusions, understanding that those who had served would recognize the truth, and those who hadn't served wouldn't fully understand regardless of how the story was told. "What decorations did you earn during your service, sir?" Rodriguez asked, though he suspected from James's bearing and the way he carried himself that this was a man who had seen significant combat and distinguished himself under fire. James hesitated for a moment, not out of uncertainty, but because he'd spent his entire post-military life avoiding this particular conversation. Not because he was ashamed of his service, but because he'd learned that talking about his highest decoration often made people uncomfortable, skeptical, or led them to treat him differently than he wanted to be treated. "I received the usual array of service medals," James said carefully, "including a Purple Heart for wounds received in action during my 2nd tour." Michael Thompson, the youngest of the SEALs, stepped forward. "Sir, with all due respect," the Master Chief asked, "what decorations you earned?" "All of them. We're military, and we understand the significance of military honors. You don't have to downplay your service record with us." James looked around at the crowd of people recording the interaction, then back at the 6 young warriors who had stepped forward to defend his honor. These men understood the weight of military service, the cost of combat, and the bonds that connected all who had worn the uniform in service to their country. They deserved the truth, even if it made him uncomfortable to share it. "I was awarded the Medal of Honor," James said quietly, his voice barely carrying over the ambient noise of the terminal, "for actions during an ambush near the Cambodian." The words hit the crowd like a physical force, creating a ripple effect of silence that spread outward from the security checkpoint. Murmurs and whispers died away as people processed what they had just heard. Even the TSA agents who had been processing other passengers stopped what they were doing to listen. The Medal of Honor was America's highest military decoration, awarded only for extraordinary heroism in combat. Fewer than 3,500 people had received the medal since it was created during the Civil War, making James Mitchell one of the rarest and most honored individuals in American history. Rodriguez's expression shifted immediately to one of profound respect and awe. In 14 years of military service, he had never met a Medal of Honor recipient in person. "Sir, would you be willing to show us your citation? I think everyone here would benefit from understanding exactly what kind of man they're witnessing." James nodded slowly and carefully reached into his wallet, retrieving a folded document that he had carried for over 50 years. His hands, weathered by age but still steady, unfolded it slowly, revealing the official Medal of Honor citation signed by the President of the United States. The paper was worn from decades of careful handling, but the words remained clear and powerful. Rodriguez took the citation with the reverence normally reserved for sacred documents, cleared his throat and began to read aloud, his voice carrying across the now completely silent terminal conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, while serving as a company commander with the 1st Infantry Division during combat operations against an armed enemy in the Republic of Vietnam. When his company was ambushed by a superior enemy force, Captain Mitchell repeatedly exposed himself to intense hostile fire to direct the evacuation of wounded soldiers and coordinate defensive positions. Despite being wounded himself, he single-handedly destroyed 3 enemy machine gun positions and led a counterattack that saved the lives of 43 American soldiers. His extraordinary heroism and selfless devotion to duty were in keeping with the highest traditions of the military service and reflect great credit upon himself, his unit, and the United States Army. The terminal was completely silent as Rodriguez finished reading, the weight of James's actions settling over everyone present like a heavy blanket. Even Patterson stood motionless, finally understanding the magnitude of what he had done. He had just accused a Medal of Honor recipient, one of America's greatest living heroes, of stolen valor in front of hundreds of witnesses and multiple recording devices. James Park pulled out his phone and began scrolling through military databases, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. Colonel James Mitchell, Medal of Honor recipient, Vietnam War. "Here's his official record," he announced, turning his phone screen toward the crowd. 3 bronze stars, 2 silver stars, Purple Heart with oak leaf clusters, Army Commendation Medal with V device, and dozens of other decorations spanning a 40-year career. This man is a legitimate American legend. Patterson was completely trapped now. He was surrounded by 6 Navy SEALs, facing a crowd of increasingly angry travelers, and dealing with a veteran whose heroic service record was being verified in real time by people who knew exactly what they were looking at. The situation was spiraling completely out of his control, and he was beginning to realize that his career was probably over. But Washington wasn't finished with his lesson. As an African-American SEAL who had faced his own share of skepticism and discrimination throughout his career, he understood the unique challenges that came with being unfairly targeted based on assumptions about who you were supposed to be or what you were capable of achieving. "Sir," Washington said to Patterson, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. If this gentleman had been younger, would you have questioned his ID with the same level of suspicion and public humiliation?" Patterson's face flushed red as he realized where the question was leading. This isn't about age discrimination, isn't it? Washington pressed, his voice gaining strength and moral authority. Because I've been through this security checkpoint dozens of times over the years, and I've never seen you question a younger veteran's ID with this level of scrutiny and public skepticism. But here's an elderly hero, and suddenly you're an expert on fake military identification and stolen valor cases. The accusation hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Everyone in the terminal could see exactly what was happening and had been happening. An elderly veteran was being discriminated against by a security guard who had made assumptions based on age and appearance rather than facts, evidence, and the basic respect that any veteran deserved. Chen, who had been quietly observing the confrontation, stepped forward to add his own perspective. "Sir, I'm Chinese American. I've been a SEAL for 9 years, and I've never had my military ID questioned with this level of hostility and public suspicion. But I've watched elderly veterans get questioned, doubted, and humiliated all the time. Why do you think that is?" Patterson was completely out of his depth now. He'd expected to handle one difficult passenger and move on with his day, maintaining his authority and control over the situation. Instead, he was facing 6 of America's most elite warriors, a growing crowd of angry travelers who were clearly on the veteran's side, and multiple cameras recording his every word and reaction for posterity and social media distribution. Rehook. But this story was far from over. What happened next would shake the entire aviation industry and lead to nationwide changes in how veterans are treated. The SEALs offered James their personal contact information. "You've got family in the special operations community," Rodriguez told him. "We take care of our own." Washington held up his recording phone. "This video will be seen by millions. Everyone will know how a TSA supervisor treated a Medal of Honor recipient." The crowd erupted in applause as people recognized James's heroism. The 6 SEALs arranged themselves around him for photos that would later go viral, showing military brotherhood across generations. Patterson, realizing his career was over, quietly apologized. James, with the grace of a true soldier, "When a veteran shows you their ID, they're showing you a piece of their soul." Rodriguez addressed the crowd. "This is Colonel James Mitchell. He saved 43 American lives and earned our nation's highest decoration. He should never have to prove that to anyone." The SEALs helped James through security with full military honors, ensuring he had everything needed for his flight. The video went viral with over 15 million views in the first week, sparking nationwide conversations about veteran treatment. Patterson was fired. TSA implemented new training programs, and James received a formal apology from the Secretary of Defense. James made his flight to Norfolk, where hundreds of supporters who'd seen the video greeted him. His great-nephew's commissioning ceremony became even more meaningful, knowing millions now understood the true cost of military service. The 6 SEALs stayed in touch with James, adding him to their brotherhood. They had reminded the world that military service transcends generations, and that heroes stand together regardless of age. Months later, James would speak at military events, sharing his story and inspiring other veterans. But perhaps most importantly, he would never again face skepticism about his service. The video had made him famous, and his story became a symbol of the courage and sacrifice of all veterans. The SEALs had taught the world a valuable lesson that day. When good people witness injustice, they have a responsibility to act. They had shown that military brotherhood transcends rank, branch, and generation, and they had reminded everyone that heroes are defined not by their age, but by their action. James Mitchell had saved 43 lives on a battlefield in Vietnam 50 years earlier. But on that day at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, 6 Navy SEALs had saved something equally important: his dignity, his honor, and his faith in the brotherhood of those who serve. Final rehook. The airport returned to normal, but the lesson echoed through the military community for years to come. 6 Navy SEALs had shown what brotherhood really meant, reminding everyone that heroes deserve respect, no matter their age. If this story moved you, remember to honor the veterans in your community. Subscribe for more stories of courage and respect, and share this reminder that real heroes come in all ages and deserve recognition for their sacrifice.